in the recent years, there's been a notable increase in conspiracy theories regarding the CIA.
Okay.
How do you feel as one that lived and worked in this organization when you hear those theories, knowing that it's a bit difficult or maybe you feel impossible to address those lies?
I've heard them, ever since I worked there. And on a one-on-one basis, if somebody comes to me and says, "Oh, you used to work there, why did this happen?" And
Why did you kill Kennedy?
Yeah, right, exactly. And, and then I explain to them, well, here's why we killed Kennedy, or we didn't, and, but I can understand why you might think that, and here's why. And so there's an opportunity to do some education there. Now, they may not believe you. You're never going to get rid of these kinds of conspiracy things. People want to believe what they want to believe. And I liken it to, and Israel's a perfect place for this, what does it mean to be Jewish? So if I ask you that, what does it mean to be Jewish? And I ask him that.
Two different answers.
And I ask my daughter that. I'm going to get three different answers. Neither one of you is wrong. And neither one of you, maybe none of you are right, but you're right in your own mind. And so that's the way all this stuff is. And, everything else has these shades to it, right? Judaism has all kinds of shades. Catholicism has all kinds of shades to it.
But maybe you have advice for us as Israelis that now faces this internal argument and we hear all those allegations. Some of them include conspiracy theories regarding the head of the Shin Bet. Mm-hmm. Maybe you have some advice for him, for the Shin Bet, how to handle those allegations.
I think you can't waste your time on that stuff. You have to concentrate on what makes sense to get the mission done, and you can't let these things distract you. That's my best advice to people.
Bob Flores, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us here.
It's good to be here.
First of all, would you mind telling us a bit about your background and what led you to the CIA?
In university, I majored in statistics and also in Russian. The CIA had a recruiter that came to the university campus. I was kind of tired of school, so I went for the interview. He thought they could use me, and so I went through the whole application process, and I got hired.
Was it similar to your expectation from intelligence world?
Yeah, I had no idea what to expect because I didn't know anything about the intelligence world. And it's not like today. Today the CIA is very open, but back then they were very, very insular and quiet about what they did. So you really didn't know.
What was your primary responsibilities as the chief technological officer?
In the corporate world, you have goals, you have objectives. In the government world, you have a mission, and you're trying to satisfy that mission, whatever it is. And you need to bring technology to bear against that mission. Because without technology, you just never get it done. Mm-hmm. So the question is, which technology? And you have to bring in the right technology. And so that's what the CTO was responsible for, was making sure we were using the proper technology for what needed to get done. And, hopefully at a decent price.
Can the intelligence agencies like the CIA, like the Mossad, can use the new technologies like AI?
Oh yeah, sure. One of the things it can help you do is understand history much better than you might be able to do yourself. Simply because a human being can only assimilate so much information in their brain. And a machine knows no limits. And so if I need to bring context to something that's happening today and understand, well, what happened 20 years ago when we saw the same political thing going on? Then, AI can be a great tool for something like that.
Sounds very useful for our region because
yeah,
everything that's going on has happened already.
Yeah, that's right.
200 years ago.
Yeah, right.
In Israel, there is a debate going on currently regarding the failure of the intelligence, of the IDF, of the Israeli government before October 7th massacre. And some might argue that the military was based on technology instead of human intelligence. Do you think that was a mistake?
Well, I certainly can't judge what goes on inside of IDF, but I will say that you need both. You need technology and you need the human element. The humans are what bring perspective to the technology. I do think it's a mistake for anybody to say, that an event, whatever the event is, was a failure in intelligence. People said the same thing about CIA for 9/11. Mm-hmm. And I was in CIA, when 9/11 happened, and nobody and no person and no entity is perfect and can't know everything. If you could, we would have no need for cybertech because we wouldn't have a cybersecurity problem. And because everything would be perfect, right? Because I would know everything the bad guys are doing and know how to stop it every minute of the day. But that's not the case. And the same is true in the terrorism world. And so it really irks me, frankly, when people say, oh, this was a failure of intelligence. I just think it's an opportunity for us to do better in the future and take a look at, okay, why didn't we see it? I mean, there are things you're not going to see. And so why didn't we see it? Now, if you look back and you say, well, we could have seen it, but 6 months ago somebody said, I'm not going to give you the money to go buy that technologies, so that you can see these kinds of things. Well, that's a great lesson to understand. But even with that, it's like I said, nothing's perfect. And the bad guys will always find a way around things.
You were working in the CIA after 9/11. Would you mind telling us about the atmosphere going through those building, going to the office those days?
Well, I mean, it was very anxious, I would say. And this is reflective on, I think, U.S. culture. In times of crisis, people come together and work together, no matter what their philosophical differences are, work together to solve the crisis. And that's what we did. It was great, frankly. I mean, it was terrible that it took an event like that to do that, but it was good.
Do you feel like after the failure, the organization was managed to learn the lessons and become better?
Well, remember, I don't look at it as a failure, okay? So don't use that word.
Sorry.
I think one always learns by events that occur, and what you have to be careful of, though, is you have to be careful of making what I call knee-jerk reactions. And say, oh gosh, if we'd only done this, this wouldn't have happened, and so we're going to do that. And then you do that, and it happens again. And you look at it and say, well, why did it happen again? Well, because you didn't really give it strategic thought into what needed to be done. And it's a natural human thing to do. I want to fix it now. But I used to caution people that you've got to slow down. You have to take all the data into account, and not just what you heard on the radio last night. And so it's a challenge. As I said, I mean, these things are all opportunities to improve.
Do you recognize part of the cyber warfare as part of the Israel-Hamas war in the past year?
So I don't know, frankly. I don't have enough knowledge about what's going on there from a cyber perspective. Mm-hmm. And I'm not read in on any of this stuff. Remember, I don't work in the intelligence community anymore. And I can tell you that what we see in America is more kinetic. It's the missiles, the rockets, the tanks, the sort of traditional warfare kind of stuff is what we see.
But we can recognize, maybe not from Hamas, but for sure from Iran, some kind of influential warfare, the attempt.
Yes, absolutely. And so if you look at what's going on in social media, for example, there's a lot of influence campaigns. They do it, we do it, you do it. Everybody does it, to hopefully to their own advantage. You can't really fault them for doing it. It's a tool that they need to use to what they believe is in their best interests. We disagree with that, but that's what they believe.
Is there any defensive way to deal with this warfare?
The biggest thing, I think, is education. About things like deep fake images and stuff like this. People are very, I'm talking about American people now, they're very quick to believe if they see it, not necessarily in print anywhere, because they might see it in the print from this newspaper and they say, well, I don't trust that newspaper, okay. But, my friend posted that.
So I believe
on
it.
Facebook or whatever, therefore I believe it. Okay? And so this happens all the time. And one of the things that we try to educate people to do is do your research. Look into it. Don't take that meme at face value.
So that leads me to my next question. How much do you recognize these kind of campaigns involved in the protests we've seen around the US campuses?
Yeah, I mean, it's been happening ever since there was social media, frankly. And it's a widespread problem, not just in the US, but everywhere. And fortunately, this is one of the areas, frankly, where artificial intelligence can help and not help, because it makes it easier to do deep fakes, but it also makes it easier to detect those deep fakes. So,
is it something that governments can handle by laws, by regulations?
I don't think so.
It's a lost battle.
Certain regulations obviously make sense. I mean, you have speed limits on the road for very, very good reasons. The Germans might disagree with that, but everybody else says, yeah, that's a very good reason to have speed limits. You can't put a speed limit on technology. That just doesn't work. And so trying to regulate things like AI, I don't even know what that means. I don't know how you would do it. Just if you look at it, it's something that everybody uses, almost everybody uses today, let's say email. And they said, email's bad because people can write stuff and tell people to go do this or go do that. Therefore, email is the terrorist. And so we have to regulate email. What? It means I only get to have 10 emails a day, or I can only write 10 emails? What does that mean? And the problem is, again, people are having these knee-jerk reactions and saying, well, yeah, 10 emails a day, that sounds good to me. So somebody puts a limit in there that does that, and then they realize, no, it only takes one email to do the damage. So, and you realize that regulation makes no sense at all after the fact, right? So they just didn't think it through. So I don't believe regulation will help the problem.
But shouldn't we be a bit worried from the situation of the possible impact of this formal diplomatic relationship between Israel and the United States when those students will graduate from Columbia, from Harvard, that have learned and educated themselves with conspiracy theories under influential campaigns will become the next leaders, the next government officials? Should it be a reason to be concerned?
I'm very concerned about it. But how does regulation help that? Other countries have tried to do this, right? They say, we're going to shut down the internet. We're not going to allow internet. Well, guess what? 90% of the people can still get to the internet. And now they're doing it surreptitiously. What would you do? You outlaw Facebook, outlaw Tinder, outlaw all these things, right? And any of these things that can possibly provide influence to people. It won't work.
But is it a lost battle?
I don't think it's so much a lost battle. It comes down to education. Can I educate somebody who is set in their ways, 18-year-old, 21-year-old or whatever, at Columbia, since you used Columbia as an example? Maybe not. It might be too late for them. But it's not going to be too late for their kids. And so let's educate people from the time they can understand anything. We've said the same thing about cybersecurity, frankly, is we've said the problem is that people don't think with a cybersecurity mindset because they weren't taught to do that. Your grandparents didn't have to do that. It wasn't a problem then. We need to educate our children about cybersecurity, not all the complicated stuff about it, they can't understand that yet, but just to make them aware. And so that when it comes time for them to access whatever social media is whenever they get to be 8 or 9 years old, that they'll understand that not everything is good that they're looking at, and that there are people who are trying to coerce you. And we just don't do a good job of that.
Don't you think that maybe people my age, maybe younger, already raised to be aware of all those dangers?
Now, you are younger than I am, I think. I don't believe you were taught that at an early enough age. Okay? You know, we don't wait until you're a teenager to teach you what 1 + 1 is.
Yeah.
We teach you that very, very soon in your educational life. And that's where not so much regulation comes in, but I would say standards come in. There are things that are not so black and white. You know, if you're trying to teach somebody about politics and what does left wing look like and what does right wing look like, you can teach them what one looks like the other, but you'd be wrong if you taught them that one was correct and the other one wasn't. They're just two different things.
Bob Flores, thank you so much for joining us here on Cybertech Global Tel Aviv. Thank you.
Sure, thank you for having me.